G'day, welcome to the Transport Latest podcast. I'm Graham McCabe. I'm a transport planner and traffic engineer with 30 years experience in the Asia Pacific.
And hello, I'm Russell King. I'm a transport strategist and transport policy expert with around 20 years of experience, and I'm the founder of the Transport Leader newsletter and blog.
Okay, Russell, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, Graham, we're going to talk about transport manifestos, those things that politicians produce around election time, saying what they're going to do. And today, we're going to cover the transport aspects of it and how these things get produced and why they have what they have in them.
Now, interesting little aside, I'm a bit of a fan of the rest is politics in the UK. And I didn't realise that in the UK, if you have a manifesto, then it has to just sail through the House of Lords. But if you introduce legislation that hasn't been put in your manifesto, then the Lords get to basically stop you from doing it if they're all cranky enough.
Not quite. So yes and no. So yes, if something is in your manifesto, it is assumed that the electorate have voted for this, and therefore the House of Lords, which of course is unelected in the UK, and because of that unelected thing, says, well, we can't go against the elected mandate of the government.
Yeah.
So that's part's true. If it's not in the manifesto, though, even then, the House of Lords will only typically, I think the convention is that they'll turn back Commons legislation only 3 times, I think is the convention.
Right.
And after that, they will let it through. So if they will basically say to the Commons, maybe you want to have a rethink, and they might say that 3 times. And then if the government still wants to pursue it, the Lords will relent because they don't have the power, the imbalance between the upper house and the lower house because of the electoral mandate. The other aspect is that governments can just stack the Lords with a load of appointments if they're not happy with it as well.
Yeah.
So one of the problems they have in the UK at the moment is the House of Lords keeps growing in size as whoever's in government decides to stack it with their own people just to make life a little bit easier.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not the House of Lords is an ongoing reform institution. People keep tweaking it almost every new government, or every Labour government certainly.
Yeah.
Likes to tweak the rules on it, but no one actually solves it properly. And part of the problem is that there's no consensus on how to solve it. They don't want a fully elected chamber. They like the idea of having people who are genuine experts in areas to provide scrutiny on legislation, which is a definite strength of the House of Lords. But we are digressing somewhat, I
Well,
think, from the
we,
topic. So sorry to go down that rabbit hole.
no, we are, but it is relevant in that in Australia, the US, Canada, other Anglo places, manifesto is often as good as its ability to be used as a feist. You put a match to it, and then you get on with the job of governing the country.
Yes and no, I think.
You can tell who the cynic is here, and who the political party person is.
Well, yeah. So there's election manifesto promises that are within the gift of government, and then there are election commitments which are not in the gift of government.
Okay, right, let's break that down.
So a good example of one which is not in the gift of government is promising what electricity prices will be.
Yeah.
So the current Labour government in Australia, when it was elected, had promised, I can't remember how much it was, $250 or something off electricity bills, something in that region. And then, of course, electricity bills actually went up for all sorts of reasons. Ukraine war was part of it, but there was also other things as well. They should never have made the promise because that was not something they could have they could commit to. But in terms of actually winning the votes, it was a very effective policy. And they never got punished for it at the next election for breaking that promise. On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of stuff which is within the gift of government for them to commit to. Governments like to deliver on those things because when you're coming up for a re-election, it's very helpful if you said, well, here's 10 things that we promised and here's 10 things that we delivered.
And I remember in another episode you're talking about that you and your minister would do a press release and announcement about the invitation to contract. Sorry, the invitation to contract for the design, the awarding of the contract for the design, the invitation of the contract for the environmental assessment, the awarding for the contracts for the environmental assessment. And you just keep on rolling this, so you're always having something to announce.
That's during general government.
Yeah,
right? Government
okay,
puts press
yeah.
releases out, and many of them every day. And it's for the journalists to try and work through which ones they think are the most noteworthy and all the rest of it. But at manifesto time, you can get sometimes very weak commitments. So often you get, we promise to do the business case
Yeah.
on something. You get a commitment to do the business case, and kind of the assumption maybe in the public's mind is, they're doing the business case, they're building this thing, when that's actually not the commitment. And so, and what you might find is that a government that's expected to get several terms the first pre-election, I'll promise to do the business case.
Mm.
They won't do anything with the business case for 3 years. And then at the next election, they say, now that we've done the business case, we promise to now to deliver it, or, something like that.
Yeah, I do recall a promise which was about a set of freeway ramps, which had been planned for 30 years. All the roads had been built to those future freeway ramps. And then there was like, whoa, we promise we'll do a study where the ramps should go. And then they spent a ridiculous amount of money doing the study on where the ramps should go in order to come back to the same place that had been planned for the last.
So that's a really good example of
Kicking the can down the road.
the challenge with manifestos typically.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in government already and you're the transport minister, you'll have a good understanding, and you've been the transport minister for a while.
Mm.
You'll have a good understanding of what's good policy and what's not good policy.
Yeah.
Maybe some aspects of it, at least.
Hopefully.
Okay. Your colleagues in seats and the leader of the government will not have that privilege. Right? And so you will be lobbied by every MP, every candidate, and on behalf of the candidates, especially in the key seats, the premier or the leader of the government, saying, we need something to promise in this seat to help us win it.
And and particularly if you're outside government, trying to win government, you don't have access to it. So you start throwing promises around, unless you have a parliamentary budget office or something like that that you can dip into.
Well, let's stick. Opposition's a really good point.
Yeah.
Let's put a pin in that second and come back to that. But if you're in government, and starting in a situation where the minister will know, we don't really want, for example, one of the common things we see in a lot of places is committing to building more commuter car parks.
Mm.
So a car park is full because it's been provided for free, okay? And as a result, there's unmet demand for more commuter parking. And the theory is, okay, we'll build more commuter car parking, free commuter car parking, and so therefore more people can access the station. Now, in our commuter car parking episode, see below, we talked about when the commuter car parking is the right thing next to a station and when it's not the right thing next to the station. Right? And there's lots of examples of where it's the wrong thing to do. But if you're a voter in a seat and you're driving to try and get a parking in that commuter car park, and it's a bit hit and miss whether you get it or not, or you're having to leave very early in order to get yourself a space, what's the intuitive thing that you're going to want? A bigger car park. And that's true for all the people that are in the car park, and that will make sense as well to all the people who don't use the car park but think, oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And it's the same with freeway widenings.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So the fundamental problem you have is the last thing you want to be doing during an election campaign is trying to explain second-order effects and system problems. You just want to go with the flow of what the public thinks as much as possible. And unfortunately, in transport terms, the public often thinks, in things that are poor policy, whether that's widening roads, free parking, train manufacturing locally, EV bus manufacturing locally. There's just so many things that are popular with the public, but deliver really poor value for money, poor outcomes, make the transport system often worse. But unfortunately, the last thing you want to be doing is having that debate during an election campaign.
But Russell, I own a car. I know how traffic works.
See our episode on experts and not experts.
It is a very serious problem. When I tell people that I'm a traffic engineer and transport planner, the first response is, yeah, I suppose there has to be somebody who does those things. And then they start telling me all the things that can be fixed and how they should be fixed.
Yes, and how they should be fixed. And let me guess. Those are the ways that they think they should be fixed are completely the wrong things.
Well, they provide the short-term sugar hit that a commuter car park does.
Okay. And that's fundamentally our biggest challenge, right? So if you're in government and you're the transport minister, you may know these things. Most of your colleagues will not.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the vast majority of your colleagues will be lobbying for things that you think are not necessarily the right thing, but that you have to provide in order to keep your boss happy,
Yeah.
whoever the political leader is, and also to make sure you're winning and harvesting votes. That is at the heart of the challenge on a manifesto if you're in government.
Yeah.
At least you're aware that they're wrong. I mean, that's the first thing. Awareness is the first sign to trying to not do those things, right? And so you might try and find other ways of supporting target seats and with good policy as well as, instead of bad policy. If you're in the opposition, typically your opposition shadow transport minister has never been the transport minister themselves.
Mhm.
They haven't had access to advice. And so they will be in a situation where they will think that building a wider road is the right answer.
Yeah. Well, but quite often they, you know, depending on the political structure, they may just be, you know, uh, members of the public who've just risen up through the political ranks, or come in from being an administrator in a union or a think tank.
And that is exactly, what the Westminster system is designed to do. Right? It's not designed to have experts in charge. It's designed for them to. The theory is that you listen to experts and you make a judgment off the basis of good advice. But when you're in opposition, you have no access to advice,
Well, the
and so you're
presidential
making.
system's also the same as well.
Yeah, and so you end up in a situation with regards to the opposition don't even have access to the advice. Really, the advice they get is greatly reduced. There'll be people who are consultants and things that they'll be talking to, but then it's really hard for them if you're going to change the narrative about transport from, say, road building is the way to solve congestion to actually the way to make our transport system work better is through more walking, cycling, and public transport. Changing that narrative. You can't do that from opposition easily. That's really, really hard. If you've got the power of the government to shift that, maybe. But in opposition, that's a really, really tough ask. So unless really in opposition, what you're doing is you're going to be attacking the government for obvious problems that they haven't solved. Like the trains aren't running on time. Well, our policy is to run the trains on time. Well, no shit, Sherlock, right? But actually,
And nobody's going to
that
ask you how. You won't get scrutinized though.
not really, because it's like, well, they can't run the trains on time, we will. Now, if you're a smart minister, you might have or smart shadow minister, you'll be talking to people about what the real problems are and how to solve them, even if you're not putting that detail out into the public domain. Okay? Which brings us on to a massive challenge at the moment, which is that many governments have got elected on what they call a small target strategy.
Yeah, where's the vision? Where's the
Don't do any of those things.
nations?
Don't do any of those things. Don't make any commitments, because any of those things can be criticized.
Yeah,
Okay? And the way to win elections is to be the least criticized party, not to offer the most important vision and etc. of the party.
yeah,
And so what then happens is government gets in and it has no idea what it is doing. And we have seen that with a whole range of governments. In fact, the former chief of staff for the former prime minister just resigned from the UK, basically admitted that they came into government with no plan on what to do, right? And said that was a mistake. Well, what a surprise. Not coming into government without a plan isn't, it's like, I appreciate you won an election and you're really smart at winning elections and, that kind of politics game. But actually, in terms of like being successful in government, you actually need to have some understanding of policy. Otherwise, you are going to come a cropper. And that's what's happened. And that's why Keir Starmer is no longer prime minister. It's a very big reason why he's not. We wait to see whether the new guy has a plan or not. So far, so not looking good, but we'll give him some time.
yeah. Well, you would hope he'd be doing a little bit better, given that he'd actually been inside the Treasury, and appears to have a few more beliefs than
Well, the former
previous
was the
one.
head of the Crown Prosecution Service, so he ran a government agency.
Yeah, but he didn't
So
actually.
you thought he would have known what he was doing, and he would understand the problems in terms of getting the delivery of the public service or the civil service in the UK's case to deliver.
Yeah,
Nope,
but he didn't have a
not at all.
He didn't like. Yeah, I mean, this is very much getting into other people's podcasts, but he didn't actually appear to have an ideology. If you don't have a grounded ideology, how do you actually set a direction for your government?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think you got to have some core principles about what you believe in and set forward, a program of government off the back of that, which is an important part of the manifestos.
Right.
If you're talking about a transport manifesto, you'll have some principles around what's working and what's not working, right? So typically on the left, you'll get our problem is that we've put things out into the private sector. We need to nationalize everything. We need to be building everything in house, and the buses and trains need to be run by the government
Yeah.
and all, and operated by the government,
See
blah,
our,
blah, 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 blah.
see our episode on privatization.
Exactly. And then if you're from the centre right, you might be typically going, our problem is that the unions are in control in government and we need to get rid of that because that's making everything really inefficient and ineffective, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. And that's kind of like a bog standard big picture narrative. Also, then governments might have different flavours. So when I was in the New South Wales government, the government had very much a big infrastructure image. So the narrative was that the Sydney in New South Wales had suffered from years of neglect on its infrastructure, and this was going to be an infrastructure government. And so we were building lots of infrastructure. And going back to your point earlier about why did you have loads of press releases? Well, one of the things was it was proving and reinforcing the fact that we were building lots of infrastructure and showing progress on infrastructure. And so that when you come to a manifesto, what you're looking for then is to say, we will build this infrastructure. So in this case, it might be a rail line, a road, bus, network, or all of the above.
Cycleways.
Cycleways is a really good one, right? Because in many places at the moment, it doesn't matter whether you're the centre left or the centre right, cycling gets peanuts in terms of announcements, right? So there'll be lots of virtue signalling. Cycling's a fantastic, active transport topic, and they'll be like, we promised to deliver this one tiny project. Aren't we amazing at promoting cycling? That's kind of what the manifesto will say. Obviously without cynicism, but that's basically what it says. And if you're on the centre left, all the cyclists will go, great, it's fantastic. Look at what they're doing. They believe in cycling. And then they get peanuts afterwards when the government gets elected. And if they're on the centre right, they'll probably keep quiet about cycling because, quite frankly, there's no votes in it for them, typically.
Yeah, well, I would say the centre left will get you're doing something, but it's nowhere near enough. So they actually get they're more likely to get criticised from their own constituency for not doing
what's
enough.
Interesting,
yeah.
What I would say though is during the election time, that constituency goes quiet.
Yeah.
Because even if they think that they should be doing a lot more for cycling, they don't want to criticise that centre-left party because they're the ones who are going to vote for, that they want to vote for and want to win, so they will keep quiet on that. It's part of the problem we have on the polarisation of transport is a major problem for us. And it's not as though we're a million miles away from having centre-right leaders promoting cycling in a big way, whether that was like Boris Johnson was a huge advocate for cycling.
When I did the City of Sydney bike plan, it went through unanimously with Conservative, Labor, Green, small business independents. So even the community that typically opposes bicycle lanes because they go, "Oh, you're going to take away car parking from out in front of our shops." They voted to pass it, and it actually cycling and public transport infrastructure often features very heavily in local government manifestos in the lead up to elections.
So one of the things that's really, I think, important in terms of programs for elections, etc., is the level of government and sort of the constituency that you've got. So one of the problems we have, I think, in Australia is that in effect, transport is heavily weighted by the states. And the states are having to provide policy for both the regional Australia, small town Australia, and also the major cities, because every state's got a major city pretty much. Well,
yeah.
We'll call them a major city, but yes, okay. and so
see our episode on mid-sized cities, and how everybody disagrees with the number that you picked out of the year.
But the problem with that is, if you're then having to appeal to a very broad geography, policies that work really well in the inner city, walking, cycling, more public transport, okay, talking about those is completely and utterly irrelevant to a very large swathe of your electorate.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Well, it is it's a demographics is destiny thing because in those denser areas, if you're on a demographics-based constituency system, then you actually have more seats. So the denser it gets, the more seats you have.
Yes, but very rarely do you you're not looking to alienate a significant, say, a
No,
third of your electorate,
yeah,
okay, with it. So what you end up doing is ending up with more broad brush policies that kind of work with both electorates.
mm,
So we promise to build more roads typically.
yeah.
Um,
And then
or
we'll
more
chuck a
car
shed.
parks.
We'll chuck a shed path along that road that's full of disgusting diesel vehicles that kill people, and go,
Yeah,
hey, we've done our bit for active transport.
yeah. And whereas if you look at the places where they've gone big on active transport around the world, it's often because the power sits within a city government,
Mm-mm.
okay, where there's a more geographically confined electorate, okay? So if you take Paris, which has obviously done a lot of high profile work in removing cars from the centre, the mayor for Paris doesn't even have the whole of the Paris region as an electorate. Right? They kind of have the inner part of Paris as their electorate. And so there's a kind of the people who want to drive into the center of Paris tend to come from the outer regions, which are not their electorate.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of system where they can please their local electorates at the expense of somebody else's electorate.
Yes. So, and an interesting one in contrast is Brisbane City Council in Australia. So Brisbane City Council it's a city council, but it's also effectively a regional council. I think it's got 600,000 residents in its great area, but they've done a very heavy investment in green bridges across the Brisbane River. So walking and cycling bridges, which have supported significant redevelopment. And these bridges some of them are quite spectacular and beautiful, and they've cost the ratepayers a lot of money. There's been a program by successive mayors and their heads of transport on all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think that's a good example of what's not happening as much in the places where we've got lots of small councils in the cities and the state really dominates.
yeah,
Right? I think there is definitely significant benefits from having that powerful council or powerful, city body
yeah,
where they appeal to the city electorate and are able to, and what you're finding is they're delivering to different audiences within that city electorate, but generally the direction is for better transport. Better transport policy than you're seeing in where that doesn't exist.
yeah, yeah. And when New South Wales went through its council amalgamations, I was a bit disappointed with how the then government did, because a lot of people we're going to have a small council because that gives us independence and local decision making, and it also makes you really weak in the face of a strong state government.
It does. There were lots of. They just didn't get the narrative right on why you needed to have
Yeah.
bigger councils would have been a benefit. We just didn't get the narrative right at all
Mm,
on that one, and that's why the political opposition for it kind of grew. When you don't have a clear, what is the problem you are solving, and that you can explain to the public easily. If you don't have that story, then you're going to go back to square one before you get this policy coming out.
yeah. Okay. All right. So getting back to the actual topic. So
Do we go down
uh,
another rabbit hole?
only a small one this time. I think it was more the tripping rather than falling. So social media, mass media, they all play a role in how politicians end up with their manifestos. Can we get good policy, or is the age of good policy as part of electoral cycles out the door? What would you
Oh boy.
what would you advise these days? Would they listen to you? How about we start with, would they listen to you?
So the thing I would say is historically it was much easier to make a narrative for policy reform. Okay. So when you wanted to do a major reform historically, you could basically go and talk to a handful of press barons and sort of the major political reporters and editors at, 2 or 3 major TV stations.
Yeah.
Okay? And you would capture like 90% of the electorate through that. So if you could explain to them why this was the right thing to do, you would have sympathetic coverage for your reform policy
Mhm.
that the 90% of the electorate would see, right? And so the amount that you needed to do was much less. The barrier to sort of convincing people for reform was much lower. Now we live in a much more fragmented media marketplace. We no longer have those sorts of gatekeepers who would sort of say, you could go and talk to and explain why this is good policy. But those people no longer exist in the same way. And where they do, their audience is minuscule in comparison to what those people of yore did. Missteps can now be amplified a billionfold through social media.
Yeah.
Right? All of that makes reform a lot harder. If you then add on to that, I would say that this generation of politicians, generically, there are some really good ones, but I think there's also a lot of people who their skill set is not in policy making. I think it's fair to say. They have found their place. You talked about it earlier, they've come up through the trade union movement. They are some sort of community activist. Their understanding of policy, the thing that this gets them elected is typically that they're able to play the political party game to get on the selection panel. They're in the right factions or whatever, rather than policy making. And therefore, a lot of them also are not in it to make policy changes necessarily. They're more in it to climb the greasy pole, I would say.
Oh.
And so you end up with a problem where policy making is not a priority for them, especially if it's high risk policy making, which pretty much all policy reform is at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, that's a very negative kind of
No, so you
perspective.
can
It's hard.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's not as though policy reform is, we can point to many places where policy reform is going really well right now. There are not many places where that's the case. The vast majority of places we're seeing, small target strategies, not a lot of reform going through. Why are so many people unhappy with their governments, judging by the fact that they are leaving the traditional political parties who ran governments and moving to alternative parties? Okay. It's out of frustration because of the problems that those people are seeing in their society and not being tackled effectively.
So we've talked about the role of experts in a whole podcast, but it seems very much like you have politicians who are only interested in votes, not outcomes, using consultants, advisors who are only interested in making the politician happy, and that's where the reform and outcomes get left behind.
I think it's a bit harsh to say that politicians are only interested in votes and not outcomes. But
Some politicians. I wouldn't.
What I would say is I would say is there's a lot of politicians who are managerial. They don't really understand the difference between managing the system and reforming the system. Okay? So their view will be, well, we just need to make sure we're managing the transport system better, rather than actually what we need to do is building less roads and building more walking, cycling and public transport infrastructure kind of thing. We just need to manage the roads better and everything will be fine kind of philosophy. And for those people that don't
AI
really...
will solve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those people, that's why you kind of get the smart city, we got to have smarter traffic lights or whatever it is, right? We'll solve our problem, as apps, will get people out of their cars, or, we just need to, provide lots of incentives for them to get out of their cars through, providing free fares, and then people get out of their cars. Well, they don't. So you've got all those people who are kind of like, they want to do all of the, managerialism in peace, but actually none of it's effective. The experts, if they ask them, would tell them it's not going to be effective, but they don't want to take on the difficult reforms. So I think they would, if you offered them, here's a nice reform that's really going to be popular with the public and will deliver the outcomes, they'll take that. But those are few and far between.
Will they take it if they know there's pain in between?
No, typically not.
So
I wouldn't say explain it as pain, but as risk. Right? So the level of risk that a politician will take on these days is very low. Lots of them are very risk averse. And so, they won't do it. I think it's interesting. Andy Burnham's at the moment in that phase where He and his staff are encouraging civil servants to come through with, difficult reforms and propose them to them. Um, I think that's probably a hiding for nothing, would be my view. They'll take something on without having fully thought it through because they haven't got a plan, rather than actually focusing on what are the big things that we actually want to reform and what's our plan for actually reforming them and winning this argument. At the moment, I've not seen anything where I'm kind of convinced that they understand the reforms that are needed and the politics behind it. I might be wrong.
We didn't discuss this as part of our preparation, so I'm going to throw a scenario at you. So
You're throwing me a googly. You're bowling me a googly.
yeah. Well, not a googly, yeah, flipper.
Oh.
Straight.
Great. Here we go.
I'm part of an advocacy group for improved public transport and redesigning the city of Wollongong so it can be, more sustainable, have more sustainable growth. As part of that, had a meeting with a senior politician, I won't say at which level, where we were talking about light rail. And it's like, oh, it's too disruptive, it's too hard, it's too expensive. And it's like, yes, so's widening our very congested M1. But with light rail, we can actually provide more housing. Our rental availability at the moment in the region is 0.5%. So basically, the homelessness is increasing because people can't find rentals, and if they can find them, they can't afford them because we've got a.
You should speak to the planning minister about delivering more housing.
Yeah, I do.
He might be interested in your seat.
Every industry event that he speaks at, I bring up the twin topic of integrating land use and transport. See another podcast episode. But it's too hard, it's too expensive, it's too disruptive argument. Well, you were part of the decision to close the railway line in Newcastle and put in light rail, which was disruptive and expensive, and Newcastle's fantastic now. And the same with the CBD and South East light rail. It was hard, it was expensive. So how do we get politicians to go, yep, I'm willing to take that challenge? It's hard and expensive. How do I, as an advocate, using this real life case study against, and this will come out after I've met with them and applied this, so we can do a follow up of whether it works or not.
So I'm going to answer a question by asking you a question because you were actually involved in some advocacy for a light rail, which was the Sydney CBD light rail.
As a technocrat, yes.
As a technocrat. So
in the background.
Why? So just for those who don't know, the light rail idea for the city of Sydney, for Sydney and the closure of George Street, that original idea came via the council, the city of Sydney council, the local government area. How did they get the state government politicians over the line?
I wasn't actually.
I have a view, but I'm interested in your view.
So I wasn't actually part of those conversations. We did all the technical work. So I was doing the technical work. I wasn't doing the advocacy piece. So I came in about the third iteration of getting light rail. It was going to be Pitt Street at that time rather than George.
Okay. So
yeah. So
I think
they did a business case, and they and so did designs, demand analysis, economics. Demonstrated that it would work. So on the technical side of things, I'm talking about. As I said,
yes,
I wasn't involved in the political and advocacy side of things at that time.
So if I was trying to get a politician over the line on that again, one is you got to look at the politician. Is this politician that you're trying to get over the line a pro-public transport politician, or are they a road builder? That's far oversimplifying it, but
Yep.
Broadly speaking. If they're not a believer in public transport and you're coming and, saying, let's build light rail, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Right? So that's problem number one you're going to go. You're just not going to get them over the line on that, right? Unless you go over their heads and find somebody who does believe in public transport and is going to tell the minister for transport to build it. The second thing I would say is, though, you've got to have a vision. Okay? Above and beyond, here's a light rail. Okay? And for me, one of the mistakes we make is we sell light rail as light rail projects. We don't sell them enough as transformational projects. One of the things I would also say is if you've got ministers who have visited light rail projects, which increasingly in Australia they could have done, and seen before and after transformations and those sorts of things, then that helps them to sort of picture what's possible. So
Yep.
that helps. The other thing I would say is you've got to be clear about, like, you go back to your problem, your issue around the M1 versus expansion versus the light rail expansion.
Yeah.
For that, you've got to start with the problem. So if you're coming in and saying advocating for a light rail, you're not advocating for the problem, right? So you haven't taken the minister on the journey. You've kind of made the same mistake that we often make in transport, which is we've jumped to a solution rather than really looked at the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that case, I would be going, Minister, we have this problem, right? Our M1 is really full, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Option one is we expand the M1. And that comes with a big, massive price tag. It doesn't help us with housing. It doesn't blah, 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 blah. So you're kind of destroying the option, which is the default that people would immediately turn to. Then I would go to, so what alternative solutions have we got? Well, one is we kind of improve the bus network. But the bus delivers X, Y, and Z, but doesn't deliver A, B, and C. What about a light rail? And then the light rail ticks the most boxes. And actually it comes out, it's a lot cheaper than, expanding the road, typically. And so suddenly the light rail becomes the option for solving the problem that the M1 expansion people thought was.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a political problem, because as you know, the vast majority of people think that the expansion of the M1 will be the right answer.
Yeah.
That's where the politics comes in. And that's where, if I was an advocacy organisation, you've got to do a whole bunch of educating the local community, which is hard.
Yeah.
Okay? Because if the groundswell of the community becomes, or there's a very large groundswell of the community going, we want light rail, not the M1 expansion, okay, it becomes much easier for the politicians to accept that option. But if the population is 90% is the answer to our problem is the M1 expansion, even if they think the light rail option is the better one,
Yeah.
the politics don't make it easy.
Yeah.
Especially if it's going to be an either or.
Yeah.
Right? So the politicians, we're going to build the light rail, but hold on, what about the M1 expansion? That's what we want.
Yeah.
Well, very hard politically to sell. Right? So, I've been in a situation where, when we were building the light rail, one of the local members, was getting some flack during the construction period. Well, there's always problems during the construction period of a light rail, inevitably. Major infrastructure causes construction challenges,
Yes.
right? Right? And he wasn't coming out and batting, for supporting, saying, this is going to be a great project. Yes, we've got some pain now, but this is going to be a great project. Wait and see.
Yeah.
Right? He was kind of like, saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing the light rail. Well, that's not the way to win the argument, right? When you're part of the government that's building the thing. So, you've got to be, as a politician, front and center, and be willing to, to go through the tricky period as well.
So can the community create the manifest? So can you have a bottom-up approach where the politicians are responding to positive reform by having the backing of community and community?
Yes, indeed. I would say if you had a large consensus grouping on the community, you would get there.
Yeah.
So if you take, when Amsterdam moved away from sort of the motor car and to more sort of walking and cycling in the 70s, that was a grassroots movement that led that change. It was
Full of riots.
Well,
they did.
Yeah.
They blocked roads. They set cars on fire.
yeah, there was a new consensus was formed. You could argue whether it was a smooth process or not, but there was a new consensus formed, which has lasted for 50 years.
Yeah, I do remember when I first started at City of Sydney, Critical Mass, which is a bicycle advocacy group, would do their Friday evening rides over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, taking out 2 lanes of traffic in order to try and get better cycling infrastructure. And I honestly,
How to win friends and influence people.
well, I honestly don't know if they still exist, but as we've talked about in the cycling episodes, we made a deliberate choice to talk to people who were interested but concerned, rather than people who were already willing to take on a challenge of having a police escort across the Harbour Bridge on a Friday evening.
Yeah, it's a difficult there's times for history has shown that sometimes that type of active strategy can be very effective. I mean, if you ask India, I'm sure they will say that,
Yes, civil
Gandhi was
disobedience.
very successful.
Civil disobedience does have a role.
It does.
In
It can be an effective strategy in some places, in the right forum. Personally, I don't think it helps cyclists myself.
No.
I think it's part of the narrative that's polarized us when it comes to cycling unnecessarily. But that would be my view. Whereas I'd much rather we had a broader consensus about cycling that I think would be much more effective right now.
Well, and having 40 years of the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea of cycling fighting against it made it very easy for the car lobby to just dismiss them. Yeah, there's I think that's my first Monty Python reference in all these episodes.
Really? Is that your first one?
That would be my first one, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
merely a scratch.
Okay, before we continue down that disastrous pathway where we'll have no listeners left, let's move on. So, is there hope? Is there a way forward? You lead a reform network. How do we reform so that manifestos are evidence based and politicians in the community are in? Aside from a couple of grumpy old men having a natter once a week.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Where I have got to now, is I've kind of been looking at different levers that you could pull on the reform space, especially on the bigger political challenges around things like road building, putting in cycle lanes, the really difficult decisions the things that politicians are finding to be really difficult decisions to make. And where I get to is actually the politicians aren't going to be the ones that lead this, I think, because it's so hard for them because so much of the public is against them as a starting point, okay? Because the public believes in building more roads. We can talk about why that is and most normativity and all sorts of other things, but that's where they are. That's where the public is, And I've written about how I think that's partly because we don't teach them that transport is a system.
Yeah.
We teach them to solve it linearly, and that's a problem. If you then looked at, say, well, one of the options is to go around and sort of leverage the experts, and in our expert episode, we talked about actually the experts have got a lot of vested interests in building more roads because that's what keeps them in jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's not going to come from the experts, to be honest with you, because at best will, in a transport department covering multiple modes, you're going to have them split. Right? The roads builders are going to be saying build more roads.
Hmm.
Even if the others are saying, even if the public transport are saying no, don't want more roads. What we need is, more buses, more trains, more cycling. So you're going to have conflicting advice, and bureaucracies tend to, gridlock when there's conflicting advice.
And
which makes it.
What do the politicians do? Do they just go, oh, well, I'll focus on something else?
Well, if you're a politician and you're getting conflicting advice, so you're getting told, well, our roads people think we should build more roads, and the public transport people think we should build more public transport, okay? And the public's on the side of building more roads. What would you do as a politician?
Yeah.
Well, you're going to build more roads, right? Now, if the experts are all against building more roads, then you might think again, but you're like, even then it's like, well, how am I going to take the public with me?
Yeah.
Right? So if you can't do it through the experts, the reform very easily, and I'm talking about the big ones, there's a lot of reforms that can be done that are not political within transport that could significantly improve things, but the big ones, road user charging, whatever it is,
Yeah.
You can't do it through the experts, I don't think, and you can't do it through the politicians and getting them to sort of lead the public because it's just so hard to do reform now. I think you've got to get down to how can we take the public on the journey and get them to shift their perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that we're missing.
Well, and road user charging is going to be the big one because that's something that urgently needs reform. And I'm not talking about fuel tax because fuel tax doesn't go into maintenance of Roads Australia or whatever you call it now. It's necessary in order to stop people from driving more and more because it's really driving. Even when you're paying electricity rates, it's still really cheap to drive an EV. And I know this because I'm an EV owner. And it becomes very easy. And well, people might not know it. I'm doing a stated preference survey of people on LinkedIn at the moment, and they think it's to advise me. I'm seeing if they will be suckered into saying yes to high speed rail. But anyway,
Yes. And the evidence is that there are significant induced mileage from electric vehicles. We're seeing that in Norway in a big way, which is the highest penetration of electric vehicles in the world.
Yeah.
So it's definitely an issue, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't just sneak the change in like it's currently trying to be done in New South Wales.
Yes and no. Like, I wouldn't say sneak, I think is the wrong way of doing it.
They're not
But I
being
think,
particularly open and communicative about it.
well, I think that's partly because they haven't worked out whether they're going to do it or not.
They've put it into the legislation, into the draft legislation.
Yes, but I'm not actually still sure they're going to implement it. Are
So,
you?
and,
Are you
and
convinced they're going to implement it?
I know, no, well, they can't because it's excise effectively.
Well, the way that they're doing it, potentially, I think there's room for going back to the High Court and saying this isn't an excise because we're doing this differently to Victoria. Okay, and we're doing it as a separate thing,
Yeah.
and this is the way it's not an exercise. So I think there's an opportunity there in that window, but we'll see what happens. But actually, I think that's the reason is if you're going to do it, yes, you need to go out and explain it and explain it well. Okay, and I also think that you need to accept that there will be some issues, like there's some challenges in the way. So if you take New Zealand, so New Zealand has now got a electric vehicle sort of road user charge, which it implemented a couple of years ago, and when it did it, the proportion of EVs dropped off a cliff, right? But partly that was because people who were going to buy EVs, because there was a kind of grandfathering, they got in beforehand.
Yeah.
Right? They purchased a whole bunch of EVs beforehand because of the subsidies that were available.
Yeah.
And then and so there was always then going to be a massive drop off in the number of EVs purchased. But if you look at the number of EVs purchased this year, it's at record levels for New Zealand. So it's taken a couple of years, but they now seem to be getting back to higher levels of EV penetration, even though they've got the extra charges now.
Yeah.
So yes, it's caused a kind of slight delay, but it hasn't, terminally done it.
Yeah.
But yes, you need to go out and explain it, and you need to implement it in a smart way as well. So if you do it in a kind of blanket way with existing EV users, I think you could find it very difficult.
Yeah, which you think about the really large reforms have been taken as a manifesto, as like that exactly what you said. There's like, here's all the problems with the current system. We could do this and it's not going to work. We could do that and it's not going to work. Here's the thing that we believe is going to work, and they get taken to an election. So can we do that with transport?
Well, okay, so two things in that space. You need to be making that case for a sustained period of time, right? It's not something you go to day one of the election campaign, you announce that you're now going to go and do GST reform, which I think was the example you were thinking of.
Yes, it was set up for both sides of government for about 10 years beforehand, and then majorly by the then government for 18 months.
Yeah, so you kind of you've got to start early and make the case and strengthen it, and then you can kind of go and talk to the community and then get ready. If you haven't done that, you don't want to do that in the lead up to an election. So you're going to dodge that bullet, which is why I'm not convinced.
Which was the
that New South Wales is actually meaning to. Yeah, and I'm not sure that the current government, New South Wales government, has made the commitment, and so the argument for it. And so I think it would be very difficult for them to actually implement as part of an election campaign. Post-election, they might make the case.
Yeah.
Because I think the legislation will say it will be the discretion of the minister when they implement or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the options is the opposition might run a campaign that says, we will oppose this, okay?
Yeah.
Even though it's their own legislation.
Yeah.
And they supported it in government. I don't know. But it might be something that One Nation opposes and said, the other two parties are going to do this, but then I'm not expecting many people who are like environmentally friendly EV users to support One Nation because they're not very big on the environment.
Yeah. So it's, Well, and
so,
yeah. Anyway.
Difficult one.
Yeah. Everybody, there's your little insight into the state of New South Wales politics in the lead up to the
we might have to edit that stuff out.
Election in March next year. Who knows?
We've got to do too many rabbit holes in this episode.
Who knows what people are like?
One of the things we haven't touched on in terms of the manifestos is there is a hierarchy of popularity of different modes with the public. right? So yes, it is. You get lots of support for building more roads to help
Mm,
car drivers, but you also get a lot of support for building trains. Like there's very few people that are against building more, against trains. Trains win votes as well, but buses much less so. And then of course, cycling can create huge backlash.
yeah.
Right. And so manifestos are not the best time as well to be talking about cycling. Again, you need to have made the case beforehand, typically. Not always, but a lot of the time. And buses just don't, there's no point in pledging lots of buses because you won't get any votes for it, which is a shame.
Though going back to the local MPs and candidates, they very often support more buses and advocate for them as part of their election platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way I would describe it is they do the minimum amount to keep the bus passengers happy.
Which is interesting
Right.
because in actually in all of Australia, it's more than the train passengers.
I know. Right. But the bus passengers, because the things that really would help bus passengers is, am I going to have a really frequent service? Is it going to be a quick service and a reliable service? And the fact is that they're willing to put the bus priority on there to make it frequent and to make it reliable and quick.
Yeah, I see our bus episode. um, yeah, well, and I feel that bus passengers are given oh, well, they're people who have to use the bus, so we don't have to worry too much about them from the perspective of politicians because they just lump it. They just go, yeah, the bus is terrible. I hate being on the bus. I'd drive if I could. But they don't agitate and complain to their politicians. So you don't,
Maybe
yeah,
there's a defeatism thing, right? Because
yeah,
the problem is if you're in a situation like we are, where the overwhelming majority of people choose to would drive, or if they could drive, would drive. If you're a bus user, you've got to use the bus. Your voice is very small at the moment. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
yeah. But having said that, part of the same local public transport advocacy group, we have had meetings with local politicians, and as a direct result of that, we do get increase in bus services. It's not, it's not a huge increase, but it is, significant that now on weekends, what was a hourly service is a half-hourly service, and actually is more useful to people. Unfortunately, I've just moved
Bus
away.
priority.
Unfortunately, I've just moved away from that route, so I don't get the direct benefit of it, but I'll keep on going for other people.
Very altruistic of you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. A bus priority?
No, so there's, a few locations where that would be good, and yeah. Well, and that's part of our stepping stones towards what we're advocating for. So getting back to manifestos.
Yeah. I think the problem with bus priority is that it then sort of gets a winner versus a loser, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Politicians don't necessarily like to make decisions when there's a losers.
yeah. Ah, okay, all right. Let's finish up with some hope.
Okay, go on then. What's your hope?
Well, I mean, you know, well, I'm going to keep on advocating for improved public transport in my region, which is also a challenge because you can occasionally piss off the people who may offer you work.
I'm working through the process of trying to work out ways of how can we take the public with us more.
Mm.
How can we, educate the public on better transport? And that's a big challenge, but I think it's one of the ones that we have to wrestle with. And if I was critical of people who are trying to do that already, the thing I would say, and I've written about it previously, is they tend to preach to the converted.
Mm.
I think we've got to work out how to talk to people who do drive and explain to them why actually this is in their interest, why it's good, why it's better for them, for less people to be on the roads driving.
Which, which, going back to the cycling piece, was one of the things that we do. It's like, the cycleways reduce demand for driving and parking because the people who can do that then have an option to do that. They're not forced in there by their circumstances to drive.
Yeah. And I don't think we use that narrative enough, anywhere near enough. I think we spend a lot of time talking about either, in cycling's case, the health benefits or the environmental benefits.
Mm.
I don't think we spend enough time talking about the benefits for drivers. And in many ways, a lot of the narrative against drivers, I think, is polarizing and unhelpful. So things like, don't want to criticize another podcast, but the war on cars kind of is for me is an unhelpful framing, which is sort of, polarizes the discussion and actually prevents you from bringing drivers on board because you're just seen as, what's the anti-car,
Yeah. Yes.
right? Rather than pro better transport options. Because unless you're like a real extremist, people are going to continue driving,
They
right?
they're useful.
Yeah, cars have a role in the multimodal transport system. Okay, and we'd be much better off if drivers believed that people on buses and people on trains and people in cycle lanes was actually helping them as well. Okay, rather than seeing them as people who are hostile to them,
Yeah.
and against them. And when we kind of think in that zero sum way, I think that's making our transport system worse. So that for me would be something that we need to do better at taking drivers with us.
Okay. All right, everybody. So there's your manifesto. Be nice to car drivers. But it is I mean, you should be nice to everybody, regardless of how they get it.
Well, I think the thing is, be nice to car drivers, but not in the way we traditionally be nice to car drivers, which is through free parking and bigger roads, right? It's be nice to car drivers by getting fewer people to drive because we provide better alternative options,
Yeah, and
right?
it,
That's the thing.
it's such a simple framing of we want to make it easy for people who need to drive by giving everybody else an option. Okay, I think that's a good spot to leave it.
Good on you, Graham. It's good to talk to you as always.
You too, and congratulations on moving into the new digs.
Thank you very much.
All right, please like, subscribe, share, and contribute if you can, and we will be back in your feed shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.